welcome everyone to this municipal webinar. It's entitled Capacity Needs for Rural and Small Municipalities from across the Prairies. My name is Roy Brooke. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm also the executive director of a national not-for-profit called the Natural Assets Initiative, and we work with local governments and many others to help them conceptualize, account for, and ultimately protect nature as a vital part of their infrastructure systems. So we come by our interest in this webinar very honestly. At the outset, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I personally am calling in from the land of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. It's in Victoria, BC. And I'd like to invite everyone to kindly consider on whose land they are joining us from. So as a brief introduction to today's topic, I will say the following. So natural assets, nature-based solutions, they're of fundamental importance to delivering critical infrastructure services and many of the other services or benefits that make our communities worth living in. At the same time, nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure, whatever the term is we choose to use, face quite a wide array of well-documented barriers. And today, we've got a really great lineup of speakers to do a bit of a dive into what some of these barriers and challenges are, in particular in smaller rural communities, and perhaps, as or more importantly, what some of the potential solutions are and how these could be potentially replicated. So that's a little bit of the sort of substantive background. And now I'd like to also just say a word about who's brought this whole webinar to you. It's being organized under the auspices of the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and they aim to scale up natural infrastructure across Canada's prairies with a focus on cleaner water and more resilient communities. They're doing this through something called the Natural Infrastructure for Water Solutions Program, or I think you'll hear people just generally calling it NIWS. And NIWS aims to take natural infrastructure from novel, where I think it resides still to some extent now, to normal, by ensuring that it's backed by evidence and that it's financed and that it's enabled by policy. Today's webinar is the first of 3 that will explore different facets of how we move natural infrastructure from novel to normal. So that's a bit of the context. We have 3 terrific speakers, and I'll just I'll briefly say who they are, and then I'll invite the first one to speak. We have Martin Van Osch, the Chief Administrative Officer with the Rural Municipality of Piney in southeast Manitoba. We have Stephanie Over, who's the Natural Asset Project Coordinator for Parkland County's Agriculture and Environment Services Department. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dustin Carey, the lead for climate adaptation with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So that's those are the speakers. They're each going to speak for approximately 10 minutes. And then we will have around 20-25 minutes to ask questions and to dig into some of these topics in more detail. So without further ado, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining, welcome you to what I know is going to be a really great discussion today, and invite Martin to take the floor, perhaps with another word of introduction. Martin embraces municipal challenges with an innovative approach and understands what is necessary to develop and implement services in rural or remote communities. He's currently working on projects that will address seniors housing, rural transit, and climate action, and is supported by a strong team approach with the goal of bettering the community, improving the lives of residents, and protecting the environment. So thank you, Martin, and over to you.
Very much, Roy. Thank you, everybody, for attending here today. And it's a real pleasure to present my presentation and bring this information forward and greater awareness about the arm of Piney. Now, as Roy stated, we are found in the far southeast corner of Manitoba. Our neighbors to the east is Ontario, and our neighbors to the south is the state of Minnesota. And our municipality is predominantly crown land or public land. About 75% of our municipality is green space, forest reserve. Our population is 1,843, and we're 2,400 square kilometers in size, one of the largest municipalities in the province of Manitoba. And as a result, we actually have a very low population density of 0.7 individuals per square kilometer. And our age demographic is a slightly older population compared to the average for the province of Manitoba. Over 50% of our residents are 55 years of age or older. And we do have a slow population growth, as you can see there on the graph. But our seasonal resident and the interest from that seasonal or tourism is growing exponentially. And that's a result of having 75% of our municipality as crown land. So there is a growing and a high demand for recreational use within our municipality. The other main industry sectors are agriculture, forestry, the service sector, and mining. So very, very resource-based. Our operating budget is small, and the demands on that operating budget are high. As you can see, transportation services is the largest. Having a footprint of 2,400 square kilometers means that we have lots of roads that travel through green space, forested areas with few or little residents there, which means no tax dollars coming in. And as a result, grants are a critical component of us achieving many of our non-core services. So taxation funds our core services, and we look at grants at funding our other activities, quite often our planning activities and pilot projects. And I can't stress enough how important those grants are in moving projects forward. As with many municipalities, we have these conflicting challenges to work with. We have mindsets and different opinions. We have social media to work with. We have councils that come from differing backgrounds. We have a changing environment as far as federal and provincial politics. So we have all these different things, and I think these issues are faced by most municipalities, and maybe the scope and scale may differ, but really the context is the same. And I think we're all fairly familiar within the municipal environment. We're all fairly familiar with these challenges. And at the core of everything is council for us here. So when we look, we have a number of innovations and investments going on into strategic plans, resources, levels of service, asset management. The larger the council or the larger the municipality population-wise, the more bubbles that are here. But really at the core for us is council, and gaining council support is critical in us implementing projects and moving forward. And how have we found success? Well, the road that fits best for us is through planning and planning for initiatives And planning through all these different things, these strategic plans, ensures that there's thought put through on what we're doing, and there's consistency. We see with plans that it provides a clear path in strategic investments, because again, we're going to a limited budget. And what I have found is these plans provide stability and have really helped in fulfilling success. And many of our plans that we have are born from discussions. And as we talk through the plans, we have identified and investigated solutions, things that have worked for us locally. For us being rural, we need to have solutions that are found here that will work here. Now, I've just listed a few of these plans. The list is far more extensive than this. But as we go through in the province of Manitoba, we've got a 4-year cycle for municipal elections. We need that continuity as staff to move from one cycle to the next. And these plans, I can't stress enough, are really the cornerstone to that. It's not that they can't change, they most definitely should be reviewed regularly. They should be living documents, but they do provide the stability that is needed for a municipality to know what the path forward is. Now, for us, it starts with identifying what resources are. So often, one of the leading challenges is accessing resources, staff and the expertise. And here in the Arm of Piney, we've looked at our resources and identified where strengths lay, and we've gained council support through these strategic plans. Staff provides the knowledge and leadership as the administrator of a small staff complement. We've only got 7 staff members in our permanent full-time staff members in our municipality. That's public works and office staff. We've got a large area, and residents still rely on us for core services. So staff fulfills that core service role. So when we think about that and those challenges that exist, for us, we needed to find something that works. And for us, we look at consultants to provide the technical expertise to help us with grant writing, to implement and action the grants that we've secured, oftentimes for community engagement. Here at the Arm of Piney, we strive for as much community engagement as possible. Solutions can come from any avenue. We don't have all the answers here within our small staff base, and nobody knows better the challenges out on the landscape than the people that live there. And for us, we're 11 hamlets spread over that 2,400 square kilometers. So the reality in one corner of our municipality and the challenges that exist there could be very different than the challenges that exist elsewhere. So we have some communities that are surrounded by agricultural land. We've got other communities that are completely surrounded by provincial forest. So we use the word consultant. For us, it's individuals. It's not a large consulting firm. And really what we found is these individuals that fulfill the consultant role are usually residents. They are retired individuals that live here. And they provide a level of expertise that's specific and in their field, and they provide dedicated time towards these projects. And that feeds back to staff providing the core service and the consultant, these project champions, fulfilling the role of implementing, actioning, and investigating some of the strategic priorities that we've established. Now, here in the Arm of Piney, I provide this slide as an example. We're very familiar with many of the struggles that other Canadians faced this year and in previous years. We are 75% crown land, and as I stated, that's a forested area. And we often see the challenges that go with that as well, which is wildfires, and we also face flooding in our area. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and our plans provide more resilience for our residents, so that when these sorts of things happen, we are better prepared when the emergencies strike. And the climate adaptation plan is one of our recent projects that we've started. And it is first to look at climate risk, do a climate assessment, and create an adaptation plan, and then identify some mitigation factors that we can, initiatives that we can implement. And how we've done this is exactly what I've identified in the previous slide. We've enlisted a local consultant to assist us in those community engagements, provide that technical expertise, prepare a report, look at all of the options, the best practices out there, and then submit a plan. And our goal is to be better prepared for when these events happen. We use the climate atlas to determine, and I think many municipalities will see changes in their environment over the coming years. And we spend the time saying, I don't want to debate climate change. We know something is changing, and we want to identify those risks, do the risk assessment, and be prepared. Nobody will fault us for being prepared. They fault us when we're ill prepared. So we work through and are working through our climate adaptation plan and mitigation plan. And as I said, we will look at the risks associated with that. We're looking at a strong community engagement process in that, and we hope to best identify what will work for our municipality. Within the natural context, we are the headwaters for most of Southeast Manitoba. We don't actually have any rivers that start in another area and travel through. We are the headwaters for the tributaries that feed into the Red River Basin. We have a large area that is already a natural landscape. And the best time to protect that is now. When you have it, it's better to protect it than after it's gone and trying to reestablish it. We have to be mindful that these ecological goods are also posing some challenges. Southeast corner of Manitoba was hit with a snowstorm, for instance, just this morning, and we have power outages that result from that natural landscape. So along with having the natural landscape, we also need the education that goes with it so that our ratepayers are well prepared for the events as they present themselves. And we also have to look at strategic investments in those ecological goods. And I think the grants provide that pathway forward to help fund protecting those areas and seeing the value. We have a mindset out there. When we looked at that word cloud, there's a lot of differing opinions. We have to provide some education to our ratepayers about the benefits of these and why we implement these projects in our municipality. So innovation is found as a unique formula for every community. We need to keep an open mind and support change. For Piney, we are always mindful of our local context. And from that, we see council support. We really rely on a team environment to support the goals and initiatives as they move forward. Strategic plans, the ones that I listed, they lay a path forward. There's many more that go with it. And these plans can help address the challenges that we encounter along the way by implementing new initiatives. From the discussions new initiatives arise.
Martin, I'm just going to hop in for a second and say, this is fascinating. We have a couple of other panelists, so I'd like to thank you very much for everything that you've laid out. If you have a couple of concluding comments, this would be a terrific time to provide them.
Keep an open mind to innovation, and I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. A very insightful set of comments from Martin. Lots to think about there. I'd now like to turn it over to Stephanie Over. As I've mentioned, she's the Natural Asset Project Coordinator for Parkland County. In her current role, Stephanie is responsible for coordinating the county's Natural Asset Inventory and Valuation Project.
Great, thanks, Roy. And I just need Martin to stop sharing his screen so that I can take over. Perfect. Okay. So good afternoon, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm thankful to be able to participate in the webinar and share some of Parkland County's experience today. So this first slide here just showing an overview of some of the challenges that I'm going to be touching on today, some of which may be common to most municipalities, other a little bit more unique to large rural municipalities.
Stephanie, I'll just say we can't see you.
Oh, sorry, forgot to start my video. How about now? Perfect. Okay, so for those who may not be familiar with Parkland County, it is a large rural municipality located just west of the city of Edmonton. It spans a total of 2,400 square kilometers with a population of approximately 32,000 people. So this works out to a population density of about 13 people per square kilometer. Our municipality also contains 8 hamlets, with a majority of which have a population of less than 100 people. And one of the challenges I wanted to start with, which I think many rural municipalities will relate to, is having a very large land base, as having this large land base results in having very dispersed infrastructure with added implications for managing and maintaining our infrastructure. One of our largest and most expensive assets is our road system. Our road network spans over 2,200 kilometers, which would cost approximately $1.9 billion to build today. And around a quarter of our annual budget, approximating $37 million in 2023, is dedicated to road construction and maintenance. And although we recognize our engineered assets, such as our roads and stormwater management facilities and wastewater infrastructure, are vital to our municipal service delivery, there's a growing understanding that our natural infrastructure and natural assets also play a role, an important role in municipal service delivery, and can often be used alongside that great infrastructure to improve resilience to factors such as increased storm intensity. However, with that limited tax base and the heavy price tag that comes with maintaining our great infrastructure, it leaves little room in our operational budget to allocate dollars to natural infrastructure options or researching feasible nature-based solutions to help achieve some of those efficiencies. So moving on to looking at lack of funding and lack of capacity, first just wanted to highlight here that the county has had the opportunity to take on some great projects related to natural infrastructure. One example being a case study that we took on in partnership with one of our local watershed groups that helped to demonstrate a potential financial benefit of implementing natural infrastructure in a way that could reduce maintenance costs associated with our road and drainage infrastructure. So utilizing a hydrologic model developed for our Modest sub-watershed by Dr. Wen Hong Yang out of the University of Guelph, we looked at a few drainage hotspots in the county, focusing on washouts caused by limited capacity to capture water, and wanted to understand if natural asset restoration could be utilized to reduce pressures on our drainage infrastructure. So the results of this case study, we did find were very site-specific and heavily relied on the available restoration opportunities within that upstream agricultural land. However, one of the trends that we did see was that with an increasing storm intensity, there was an increasing benefit of implementing these restoration efforts in the form of flow reduction. And although this project was a great start in beginning to understand how nature-based solutions could be implemented to improve the resiliency of our infrastructure, as I mentioned, the results were very site-specific, and there were some data limitations that would need to be addressed. And again, those take time and resources. It's also important to note that much of the work that we have taken on to date has heavily relied on grant funding. And although we recognize there are many excellent grant funding opportunities, those grant funding comes with challenges in itself. The first being that grant applications can be very onerous, requiring a lot of information, data, and time, and it can be challenging to plan for grants as we often run into capacity issues. And a lot of times grant funding opportunities require multidisciplinary expertise to provide the necessary information, which requires us to overcome another challenge in the form of departmental silos. So where we often have to make the business case to other departments internally to dedicate time in assisting with these applications, which we understand can be difficult when each department has its own workload and own operational priorities. Additionally, grant funding opportunities often require matching funds of some kind, which is not always feasible and requires forward planning to be able to incorporate those matching funds into our annual budgets. And having this heavy reliance on grant funding rather than that security of dedicated operational dollars also makes it difficult to plan for projects that you don't have that secured budget for. And it's why it's important to start building that business case for allocating those operational dollars to building that resiliency into our infrastructure, but again, taking time and resources to do so. So the next challenge here being data availability. So there are currently some data gaps that we would have to address to make that business case to push for those additional operational dollars to be dedicated to some of those resilient infrastructure initiatives. Both gaps in our data when it comes to great infrastructure, as well as gaps when it comes to understanding the role of those natural assets, enhanced assets in municipal service delivery. And addressing those data gaps can be quite costly. That being said, there's some really great data out there, some of which we may not even be aware of. Another challenge in itself is that there's no centralized data bank for this type of information. And even as a municipality, our data is collected and stored throughout different departments, and it can take time to bring that information together in a way that effectively can inform our projects. Addressing these data gaps would also be helpful and beneficial for informing some of our supporting policy as well as our internal design standards to push to support the implementation of more natural infrastructure options in newer development projects. And the last challenge I wanted to speak to is just cross-jurisdictional coordination. So recognizing that our natural assets span beyond our municipal borders and are managed by multiple agencies, which can be challenging when it comes to managing and restoring natural assets. So as an example, we were lucky to be able to take on a natural infrastructure project along one of our shoreline areas in the county. However, in doing so, we were subject to quite an extensive approval process through the provincial government, triggering full Water Act approval, as well as additional authorizations required under the Public Lands Act. So really seeing some opportunities there to help streamline that process to be able to take on more beneficial projects like this one and reduce our time commitments there. And ultimately just wanting to recognize that better coordination and collaboration across these agencies can act as an opportunity for improving the way our natural assets are managed. One example of where we are working at a more regional level to help address some of these challenges is our participation in the Edmonton Municipal Regional Board's Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment, which is a regional assessment of climate risks. Again, working at that regional level to better understand areas of vulnerability and put plans in place to help mitigate those risks and make more informed decisions on where to prioritize investments in critical infrastructure and where we can explore some of those more nature-based solutions. So really just wanting to finish up on a positive note to talk about some of the successes that we have had. Firstly, our participation in the Provincial Wetland Replacement Program, which provides funding collected through compensation from impacts to wetlands for our municipality and other participating municipalities to be able to take on wetland construction and restoration projects on the ground. So our first project went in this past winter, and this photo here is just showing what it looked like this past summer. One other really great provincial program here in Alberta is the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program, and it provides eligible municipalities and nonprofit organizations with funding for projects that enhance communities' ability to withstand future flooding and drought. We were recently able to secure funding to take on a natural asset inventory and valuation project where we will be mapping the extent and condition of natural assets throughout the county and completing an economic valuation of some of select ecosystem services being provided through those assets, and really seeing it as an opportunity to help demonstrate that importance of starting to invest in our natural assets and seeing that valuation piece as a potential pathway to promote more innovative financial solutions and mechanisms for supporting natural asset management. and an educational opportunity for retaining natural assets on private land, recognizing that majority of our land base is private property. So just wrapping up here, currently the county does participate in the IISD program, which is one financial mechanism to support the retention and restoration of natural assets on private land for the greater good of the public. So it's a volunteer program for our agricultural producers to participate in, and provides financial compensation for the protection of ecosystem services. So agricultural producers can take on projects, things like enhancing riparian buffers, as well as alternative watering systems to keep livestock out of our natural water bodies, with that compensation piece. And we do monitoring as part of that program. We're looking at moving into more soil carbon testing as water quality monitoring as part of that program, which coming first full circle can help. We can use that data to put back into the modeling systems like the one I spoke about earlier, because really those models are only as good as the data we're putting into them. And that wraps it up for me. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Lots of great practical examples. Just before I move on to Dustin, I'm just going to drop something into the chat here. We've spoken a fair amount about barriers so far, and I'm just sharing a research document that NAI did, where we looked at the academic and the gray literature, and you see some very clear buckets, whether you're talking about Canada or anywhere else. All of this stuff, all these barriers fall into some fairly clear categories, even though the issues may express themselves differently from one place to another. So I thought that may be a useful resource for some of you. Now, our third speaker, Dustin Carey, whom, as I mentioned, is with FCM. He's also an expert consultant with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or DESA. He specializes in climate adaptation, municipal asset management, capacity development, and sustainable land use practices. Dustin also works or does work to enable local governments to create low carbon and resilient communities. So with that, thank you, Dustin, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks very much, Roy, and good afternoon, everyone. So got the invitation to speak about resilient infrastructure as part of this, with regards to overcoming some of those capacity development or capacity challenges, and prompted the question in my own mind of what do we mean by resilient infrastructure? And looking to a few sources like UNDRR and the OECD, a couple of themes really emerge of infrastructure that lasts, that bounces back after disruptions, that meets levels of service, and that is ready for the conditions that it will operate within throughout its life cycle. So not built for current or past conditions. And when you think about it, those are all definitions that can apply to gray infrastructure if you think about it ahead of time, those design considerations, but really are relevant to natural infrastructure as well. And particularly within the challenges that municipalities across Canada are facing, and we heard some of them in Martin's conversation, every community in Canada is facing infrastructure challenges right now. The effects of inflation, pressure from constituents not to raise taxes, the pressures associated with either increasing or decreasing populations, aging infrastructure, with so much in Canada having been built between the 1950s and 1970s, and really coming time for major renovation or renewal. Always increasing service expectations, as well as the challenges that come, especially in smaller communities, when institutional memory and skills leave the community. And all of those challenges really kind of ignore the other big elephant in the room, which is that so much of the infrastructure we have in Canada is not built for the climate that we're experiencing today, let alone future challenges that we are going to experience as the climate continues to change. And little stat at the bottom there, taken from the Canadian Climate Institute, just really emphasizing the importance of quality infrastructure in Canada's economic activity. And the scale of economic productivity that is put at risk by having infrastructure that is not equipped to deal with the challenges that it's being placed on it. So within the context of those happy thoughts, I'm sure at least a few thoughts are straying right now a little bit to what can be done about it. Just that perception of there are so many challenges to deal with right now, how to prioritize, how to really make progress against them. And some of the foundational skills that really lead to what's being discussed here, the work that Roy has helped with the National Assets Initiative, really start with some of those asset management fundamentals. So business practices that really look at what you have, where it is, the value, and putting in place the systems to evaluate needs and investment to make sure that your service expectations are being met across the community with the resources that you have, and balancing those against the risks of failure. And those capacities can be applied to things like climate adaptation, risk management, as well as mitigation in a number of ways. An example that FCM has profiled is Donator in Manitoba, community of, I believe, just shy of 1,000 people, that has shown as a really eager adopter of some of these practices, while at the same time making progress in FCM's Partners for Climate Protection framework. And some of the rationale and benefits associated behind asset management works are that more consistent and sustainable service delivery with more effective cost management over the life cycle of an asset. Far too often we think about the upfront procurement of infrastructure, that very first piece, while forgetting that the largest majority of costs are going to come through the operations and maintenance of it over its life cycle. So through that better management of infrastructure, you can keep that higher condition and service expectation, which builds resiliency against interruptions, all at the potential of lower costs over the decades that you might own it. And really critically, there are great province and regional-based organizations that can help local governments work on this. Within FCM, we've had our Municipal Asset Management Program for the past 7 years, which have supported more than 1,500 projects across Canada, the majority of which in communities with populations under 5,000. But on the prairies, there are organizations like Asset Management Saskatchewan and Infrastructure Asset Management Alberta, which really have that local expertise as well, and have been really critical capacity development partners within the prairies that can help upskill communities to undertake these work and start to build that foundation for integration of more natural infrastructure and natural assets into those existing frameworks, all while occasionally having to flip your thinking, where great infrastructure tends to always follow that depreciation curve of the slide a few back. A number of natural assets have the great feature that over time, the value associated with them and their capacity to deliver ecosystem services increases with ecosystem maturity. Just really emphasizing the point around the importance of resilience a little bit, using an example of roads here rather than water infrastructure. But this modeling comes from the Canadian Climate Institute, which modeled infrastructure responses against the impacts of climate change. and found that across Canada, we can see in many provinces escalations of about 70% in cost pressures to maintain existing service quality and condition in road assets under a high climate change scenario. But through changes in design, procurement, operations, and maintenance, much of that can be eliminated. So in Alberta, for instance, that near 70% cost pressure could be reduced to closer to 15-18% over the next 30 years as a result of climate change. But we heard a number of times in the previous two presentations that need for external help for municipalities. And that's where I'm really glad that FCM is going to be able to help play a role in supporting communities. As part of the National Adaptation Strategy released earlier this year, it was announced that FCM would be receiving $530 million to support climate adaptation and resilience initiatives across the country. Across that, we're really breaking it down into 3 funding tracks with a progressional logic to it. The first, that readiness for climate change, is looking at things like climate risk assessments, adaptation plans, and integrating that risk reduction work into a lot of the work that you already do in a community: asset management, land use planning, capital planning. So exactly as was previously stated, starting to mainstream it and take advantage of successive granting opportunities. The next track really around implementing those solutions. So grant-based funding that helps fund projects that fall under the DMAF funding threshold. And we heard in Martin's presentation the challenges of even applying for grants in smaller communities. So we're making sure that the application and reporting requirements associated with this are commensurate with it being a sub-$1 million project level. And the third track, really looking at much bigger systems and how we can attract larger financing opportunities. Just to wrap up really quickly, the first funding opportunities associated with this are planned to open next year upon receipt of funding from the federal government. And we expect that nature-based climate solutions to be a major component of both the implementation stream, as well as a number of the climate-ready systems and processes. And especially for that track 1, the readiness stream, much of the application effort will be similar to our municipal asset management program, which again has funded primarily smaller communities. And we expect funding to open for that in late summer, early fall of next year. So if that sounds appealing, would encourage you to sign up for FCM Connect or reach out to the Green Municipal Fund at gmfinfo@fcm.ca.
Super. Thank you very much, Dustin. I'm sure that'll be welcome news to many people listening on the line. We have around 15 minutes for questions. What I'd like to do is to invite people to put their questions into the chat box, and then I will read them out. And if they're just specified as a particular person, and if not, we can just take a stab at it. I have a couple that I'm going to pose just maybe to get things rolling. This discussion is around capacity needs for smaller municipalities. There's plenty of challenges. There's a number of solutions and evidence. I'd like to ask each panelist if you had one piece of advice for where to take the first few steps keeping in mind the picture that Dustin put up of somebody drowning and with the word help on their hand. What would your one piece of advice be to someone starting this journey? And I'll turn it over maybe to Martin first.
My piece of advice is be open to any ideas. And I think I stressed that in the PowerPoint presentation about innovation comes from all sources. So for me, listening to the people that live here and what the needs are, and then finding the resources to fulfill those needs.
Thank you. So openness. What about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, I would suggest that a great place to start, especially if you're really dealing with those capacity issues, is just looking for external partners that are already taking on similar work in your region. We've had great success on partnering with things like our local watershed groups like the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. So a lot of groups that are already taking on some of that work that can help really offset your capacity limitations.
Great. So openness, partnerships. Dustin, what's your thought, your top piece of advice?
I'm a big fan of a quip from Dwayne Nickel, the CAO of Selkirk, Manitoba. He wants to see more R&D in the municipal sector, rip off and duplicate. With so many communities facing the same challenges, there's a good chance that one of your neighbors are undertaking something similar. Chat with them, and if they're doing something right, do the same thing.
Great advice, great acronym. So as another question here, but this one's for Dustin. I think, it's very exciting to know about the funding that you'll have through the National Adaptation strategy. There's also provincial funding sources. There's quite a few different federal funding sources. You mentioned DMAF. For somebody who is somebody like Martin, where it's one or two people with an awful lot of responsibilities, and they don't necessarily have time to go around and kind of check out 5 different funding options, or even know that they are all available. Do you see a way? Can you speak to maybe the possibility for these different funding sources to be coordinated, or to make it easier for the lowest capacity local governments to actually meaningfully engage with this really growing set of funding initiatives?
Yeah, and the degree to which this funding landscape can change month to month just adds another challenge to it. I would say that provincial associations, provincial municipal associations tend to be a great source of information, who tend to be very on the ball with funding opportunities for their communities. And specific to some of the climate work, for instance, the Prairie Climate Center, great resource that tends to be aware of some of the support for communities. We heard reference to the Climate Atlas earlier in the presentation. So yeah, kind of building on what Stephanie said, there are some great partners out there, and people who really specialize in this. And knowing a few of those key contacts and having relationships with them can be a great way to branch out.
Great advice. Thank you. We have a question from Victoria here. Well, first, someone asked about sharing presentations. So yes, so we can make that happen. Victoria Brown asks, with respect to capital funding resources, sometimes rural community projects do not meet minimum funding thresholds. How often are rural communities putting in combined/regional applications? Can you speak to the project management conditions? So I think that's sort of implicitly a question for you, Dustin.
Yeah, we've seen that particularly as a problem in a number of federal streams, like the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, We've learned a lot of lessons through our asset management program, where even a 10% cost share on a $50,000 grant can be a challenge if you're working with communities with populations of 50. So we allow joint applications to reach that, and planning on scaling that to both the planning and implementation streams, as well if a number of communities want to work together for a coordinated, for instance, watershed scale project. We're looking at supporting and actively incentivizing them to do so. So want to see that level of collaboration, and we're cognizant of the challenges of meeting cost shares, let alone the minimum project value, which we are not building in as major requirements.
Great. Well, I'm sure many people will be happy to hear that's on your radar. So a question from Melanie. For Red Deer County, they're looking at more community resiliency for emergency planning, but it also bleeds into climate adaptation and preparedness for climate issues. Would the Readiness for Climate Change Fund initiative work for a community resilience plan that has components of climate adaptation strategies embedded within it?
That's I don't want to get too specific just yet. The design of the funding still has to be approved by the Green Municipal Fund Council, so it's hard to speak to individual projects at this level or at this time. But for the most part, this funding coming from the National Adaptation Strategy, that pre-disaster preparedness and like long-term work for preparedness is the major focus rather than emergency preparedness. No, there is a gray area in it, but yeah, the climate adaptation is the central focus of the program.
Okay, thank you. So someone has put in an interesting looking resource. It says Climate West has a free help desk for anyone in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. There's a website, so I'd invite you to look at that. Guy Greenaway has said, a lot of the focus seems to be on creating natural assets, green roofs, bioswales, restoring wetlands, and so on, and asks if we can speak to the efforts to protect functioning assets. If I can briefly chime in here, I'll say that, you know, protecting what is probably the best, and not destroying stuff is probably the best money anyone will ever spend, because you can never rehabilitate stuff to their pre-existing state. You know, certainly from Natural Assets Initiative point of view, understanding what you even have is an excellent starting point. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask Stephanie to perhaps comment, reflect on that a little bit also, from her point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. And I'll just echo your point as we move forward with taking on a natural asset inventory and valuation in the county. It really is about understanding what's here and understanding the services being provided by those natural assets, and really understanding what we have so that we can prioritize our conservation and efforts, as well as prioritize where we're doing restoration on the ground by doing a condition assessment piece to understand where those natural assets have been heavily impacted by development. And I would just also add that I don't think it has to be, you know, just natural infrastructure, just gray infrastructure. We're really looking at it as an opportunity to utilize those natural infrastructure options to improve the resiliency of our gray infrastructure as well, and hopefully reduce the maintenance requirements on that existing gray infrastructure.
Super, thank you. Martin, you've talked a lot about the really extensive assets in Piney. Do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I can. I think it just comes along with the education, the mindset that exists on the landscape as well. I think that people don't attribute enough value to what exists and they don't realize that value till it's gone and something has happened. So I think we still see a bit of a disconnect in rural environments in that regards.
Thank you, Martin. And maybe to round out the answer to this question, Dustin, do you have thoughts on how this, your funding, or perhaps any other funding programs may be relevant, not only to restore, to rehabilitate, to plan, but also to very clearly protect what is already demonstrably providing services and value?
I think Stephanie really hit the nail on the head, and NII has been a major proponent of this work in Canada. Understanding that value of services provided by natural infrastructure is absolutely critical in factoring in that that rationale for preservation as well, when other competing pressures like development or the like force a little bit of the decision there. But yes, we really do see natural infrastructure as a critical component of climate resilience, and want to see things like valuation and valuation, threats to natural infrastructure and other dimensions being integrated into some of those decision-making frameworks and risk assessments.
Great. Thank you. And I'd also invite people to, I popped in our webs, the Natural Assets Initiative website, and invite people to have a look at that, because a good chunk of what we do as a not-for-profit is to help people understand, what are the natural assets in my jurisdiction? What services are they providing? If I were to degrade them, could I cover the costs of then needing new engineered assets to do what nature had previously been doing? And then helping people walk through the decision-making processes that flow from that, with your really worst case scenario for embarking upon the work being taking a better decision. I mean, that is your kind of baseline scenario with understanding the value of nature. You can still do whatever you want, but at least your decision's an informed one. So Andrea Miller here says, to Dustin's R&D point, she encourages folks to check out lessons learned from the, I don't know what MCCAC stands for, but I'm sure others do, Climate Resilience Capacity Building Program. So she's put in a link there. Catherine Pierce says the Battle River Watershed Alliance in Alberta has an initiative to develop tools for municipalities to align watershed management plans in MDPs, I'm assuming that's municipal development plans, and bylaws, including an assessment of successes, such as policy that protects natural assets where policy gaps exist, and then providing bylaw language examples. That sounds terrific. And Catherine, if anyone wants to follow up, maybe put your coordinates in the chat. I'll also say that, you know, we're working with people in the prairies in a variety of ways, one of which linked to bylaws is actually to have stronger enabling language in official community plans, because if it's not there, then that's a bit of an impediment. We're almost at time. I would like to see if there's any other final questions from anyone in the audience.
Roy, in the other tab beside the Q&A tab, there are two questions in there.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay. So for the first from Cameron, Dustin and Stephanie raised that there is a challenge in keeping gray infrastructure running is taking away resources from establishing green infrastructure. How do we change the situation where municipalities are using all of their resources, or change from the situation where they're using all of their resources on gray infrastructure? And I think some of the panelists have hit on this by saying we need to understand what those assets are, what their value is. I mean, if you don't know that, you can't get at that question. But I'll invite the three panelists maybe to take a quick crack at that in our remaining minute.
know it's a very different context and size of municipality, but I love the City of Vancouver's Rain City strategy. They looked at the billions that would be needed to maintain stormwater service level quality and compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars in investment needed if they went the green infrastructure route. So that savings of billions of dollars really made that decision for them.
Yeah. Anything from Stephanie or Martin on this point about shifting away from a kind of default to gray?
I don't think that for Piney, where we have such a large landscape and such a greenscape already, that we don't have as much of that issue. The bigger thing is to protect what we have in place right now.
Great, thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, I think I already touched on my presentation, but really just understanding that role that our natural assets play in municipal service delivery better in order to make that business case for more operational dollars to be dedicated.
Okay, we're at time. There's a final question about whether anyone can speak to active transportation plans. I think we'll have to follow up on that by email because I can see folks are going to need to drop off. I would like to thank all of the panelists for their time, the really great insights and valuable information. I'd like to thank IISD through NIWS for putting this on in the first place. There are a couple more of these coming up. There's one on November 21st at 11 p.m. Central Time, and this is all around financing natural infrastructure. The third will likely be December 5th, and that is to look at a natural infrastructure roadmap in Canada. So please do mark down the 21st of November and the 5th of December for some more great discussions. Also, there's a newsletter that folks can sign up for on the NIWS website. So that will provide more information. So with that, huge thanks to everyone for joining and taking your time today. And again, to all of our panelists.